I start afresh? Um, I apologize again for the interruption. Had a bit of a technical problem with the sound. Um, Let me repeat again that this is the formal launch of a program which I had thought it is important for the purpose of the CCMA that we launch, not only celebrate the Women's Day, but do a Women's Month. And today, as it is the 3rd of August 2020, it is the day chosen to be that day. And it's the 3rd because the month started during the course of the weekend. And that is why this launch is done today. And this launch is important for a number of reasons which will become evident in this submission. And I will also introduce some of the aspects that are important for the purposes of this program. When I spoke to some of the professionals, I was advised that when it comes to this subject, as the CCMA, we are damned. Damned in the sense that we are a dispute resolution institution, and we also have our status as the employer. So I'll make a few notes with regards to both capacities. And I must say that I will also introduce to you the full program for the day, particularly that after this opening, I will request that all of us who are participating in the program to observe an 8-second moment for those who are affected by the exacerbated gender-based violence. And then immediately after that, I'll make a ceremonial submission on behalf of the Commission. Then after that, I will introduce the entire month program from week 1 to week 4. Immediately after that, we'll proceed to a video, which will be the last session that we will be interacting with. And I will therefore close just before we start the video. The last item which was appearing in our program, which had intended to use, is what we call the motivational piece or speaking from the heart. I had before some other supervening events, had in mind that I shall share that with you. And I have since decided not to proceed with that part. So there will be no the directors speaking from the heart. Sometimes the danger of speaking from the heart, but it is brainless. So I do not want to submit things that might be controversial. So having said so, I will then proceed to item 2, where we do the moment of silence for 8 seconds. Let's proceed and do so. Thank you. We will then proceed to the submission by the director. One of the things that must be understood and very clear by the CCMA is that the CCMA stands with women on the point that we denounce gender-based violence. It doesn't matter in what capacity we're appearing in, whether as an employer or also as a dispute resolution institution. And what I mean by that is that the CCMA as an institution that deals with disputes that are referred to it, we are expected to behave in a certain way, which I will talk about briefly later. And secondly, in the execution of that function, we as the CCMA are also expected to be an employer that is exemplary in acknowledging this increasing scourge of gender-based violence. We at the CCMA, we will not promote directly or indirectly any conduct that is suggestive of a gender-based violence. so we denounce it. One of the stories that was interesting to share is that I'm one of the few professionals who have the privilege of being sent to the International Labour Organization, where all wide range of issues are being discussed. Part of the discussions that happens is the one that relates to gender-based violence. I must add also that 2 years prior, we had a scenario where there was a committee that was established to deal with harassment and violence. And after all the sessions were completed, this is one session that could not be completed because there were a lot of differences, there were a lot of disagreements. And it will be quite not surprising to note that one of the key differences which was happening in that committee that took 2 years to resolve was the definition of what harassment means. So all social partners could not agree on the meaning of harassment. I'm raising this issue because if we have difficulty in understanding such basic and important definitions such as harassment, how would we act to prevent it if we do not understand it? But fortunately, last year, this matter was resolved. I'm raising this issue because it's important to understand that the ILO conventions, as they are issued, South Africa is a signatory to the ILO and a very important partner for that matter. So therefore, if there are conventions that are made and having regard to our constitution, we are therefore expected that we will, as we interpret and apply our own constitution, that will have regard to international law and foreign law. And conventions are one such. So the promulgation of such a convention will then have an impact on our municipal or our local legislation because the contents and the spirits and purpose of such a convention must be incorporated into this legislation that we have, such as the employment equity, for example, the equality courts that we have, and to the extent that the criminal procedure or the criminal justice system is influenced by such decisions, because we've got to act in conformity to international standards when it comes to these global problems. So fortunately, that was resolved. Part of the concern as a dispute resolution that we have is monitoring and ensuring that the principles which are discussed internationally are perfectly and properly incorporated into our legislation. And we've got to make sure that that happens. But that responsibility is not just a responsibility of our women folk. It is a responsibility of all genders to make sure that the gender-based violence, as defined, it is eliminated. The ideal that we're looking for is not just management of GBV, is to achieve an ideal where there is no gender-based violence, let alone violence. But this one is specific, therefore it must be dealt with specifically. At the CCMA, one of the things that we ought to do is to demonstrate our detest of gender-based violence in the execution of our functions. What I'm going to ask as part of this submission is that when we talk about gender-based violence, it must not be an interesting topic. It must not be a formality. We've got to give content and substance to it and make sure that it is eliminated. So as the CCMA, we stand together with the world and the call of the President that we must act against gender-based violence. When we're talking about the launch of Women's Month, I'm sure that a lot of women in South Africa and the world will agree that it's not just about gender-based violence, it is also about the transformation and development of women. And again, it must not be a talk show. And one of the good examples that I have is that when I took the reins as director, I found a male-dominated executive committee. It only had one woman. And today I'm proud to say that there's more women in the executive committee than men. This is based on a very conscious program that I have embarked on to make sure that in the positions that matter, in the positions of leadership, that women will play a role not because they're women, because they're there on merit. But it is a cherry on top that such leadership is held by women. So I'm proud of such a development. Even the next layer of leadership for our senior management, we've put a lot of women there, not because they're women only, but because they are there on merit and they deserve to be there. That is important that we have such a recognition. It is only a cherry on top that it is women that are developing. It is women placed in a position of responsibility. We've got to deal with the attitude that when you're looking for a secretary, a woman must do so. If you're looking for a note taker, a woman would do so. If people are going to make tea, it's going to have to be women. Men can do all those roles as well, including playing a role during the maternity leave of our women. So this developmental program, which is transformative in nature, has been quite successful at the CCMA. We're not there yet. There's a lot to go through. There's a lot of attitude to deal with. There's a lot of mentality that we have to deal with. But that can only be done if we play a proactive, rehabilitative role in dealing with GBV and women development. The other important subject, which we sometimes just touch and go, when you're talking about women development and talking about our stance against gender-based violence, there's always a perpetrator when you're talking about violence. And there's evidence that shows that men perpetrate gender-based violence. Our call to all our men is that violence, particularly gender-based violence, is not allowed anywhere, not especially at the door and workplace of the CCMA. So we as men have to play a very active role in ensuring that not only are we perpetrators, but we also ensure that we root out others who are perpetrators of gender-based violence. So this is a call for us as men to play our roles in ensuring that we do not do so. And finally, on men, that we must contribute into the development of women. The other important subject, which in my view requires consideration, it's the impact of this call on legislation. One of the practical examples that I normally use is maternity leave. There's also what is called paternity leave. But there is no equity in the application of principles there. Here's the question I'm asking. I do note that the majority of those that sit in legislatures are men. And as a result of that, inherently, there will be some biasness. But the question I'm asking in relation to the Basic Conditions of Employment Act is that why is it that when it comes to maternity leave, that the portion of the maternity leave is unpaid? Yet, in the same process, that men who played a role to cause that pregnancy is continuing to work and continuing to earn an income. So when we pass this legislation called Basic Conditions of Employment Act, with the inequitable distribution of responsibility and deprivation, what purpose did we have? Is it possible that the basic conditions in its current structure in dealing with maternity and paternity leave, that it is also embedding a culture of inequity and also inequality when it comes to paternal and maternal responsibilities? I, as a man sitting here in front of you, one thing that I'm clear about is that I'm a product of a woman. Not only was I carried for 9 months and given birth to by a woman, but I was nurtured and brought up by a woman. It's even worse in circumstances where you are a single mother. I think, as a dispute resolution institution and also as a workplace, the time has come for us to have this conversation. I've had the time to also walk about and check our different provinces and our different regional offices and also the head office. And I ask myself a question. Is the workplace designed in such a way that it accommodates the kind of challenges that our women face every day? Do we even care to have the conversation? And I'll give an example. It is true that I wouldn't be sitting here and talking to you if I was not brought up and nurtured by a woman. And I remember a story years ago when I was studying as a lawyer at the University of South Africa. There was a time when we did not have money to pay for my studies. My grandmother, who has been a mother to me, who's now late, played a very important role in ensuring that I continued to study. We could not afford money to go to the residential universities. One day we could not afford to pay for my studies up to a very last time. Then she said, I have a friend that we can go and talk to who might assist. At that time, all I needed was just 1,600 rand so that I can be able to have access to TAFSA, as it was called then. We then proceeded to this four-roomed house, and we found an old lady with a daughter and a granddaughter. And my grandmother said, I have a grandson who has to go to university, but we don't have 1,600 rand. And what this lady said, it's okay. Come see me the next day, which was the last day for registration. Come at 7 o'clock in the morning. When we arrived, she was there 1 hour earlier, and she gave us money, that 1,600 rand. I managed to register my studies because of this old lady staying in a four-roomed house with a daughter and a granddaughter. And when you walk into that house, you will not think that you will have that kind of help. But she did help us. She did help me. And as I'm sitting here, every time I come to work and every time I study, I always have the glimpses of this picture that I have degrees as I'm sitting here, degrees. And I have a lot of achievements that I've done. But when I look around, the pillars of that success has been women. My grandmother, Joyce Jogas, my mother, and this lady. So if we then as men wage violence against women, it means that for even those that have built who I am would have not been able to produce the product you see in front of you. And I'm raising this calling to the conscience of man to understand that to recognize these principles to do what I'm talking about, it's not a favor, it's a natural responsibility. Every woman beat up, every woman abused, you're not only abusing that woman, you're also abusing the children she gave birth to, those that she is responsible for, and it is that reason why as men we should not be doing so. And to the topic I was talking about, the workplaces, I can comfortably tell you that our workplaces, our laws, and the policies that we have are not structured and geared in such a way to accommodate the kind of challenges that women experience. I always make this example that when you come to work, people carry a lot of burdens. Today we're sitting with COVID-19. Children are not going to school. Families are infected by COVID-19. When the president makes the call that children must not go to school, how many of those children that are sitting at home needs to be taken care of? I'm talking about being taken to the internet, online study, feeding them, doing all those important responsibilities. And while doing that, still we demand that women must perform in terms of our contract of employment. Not only are we wrongfully, in my view, providing less in law when it comes to basic conditions relating to maternity, where they have to proceed with paying leave without pay portion in their maternity leave. That requires review. Because as you go through all those daily responsibilities, they still have to come to work and perform. And while performing, who's taking care of the child at home? How many of us as men do care to ask these questions? That as I proceed to work and get paid, but the woman I made pregnant taking care of my child is taking pay, taking leave without pay. Doesn't matter whether it's a month or 2 months. But that child that is born and conceived is a responsibility of both men and women. But why is it, therefore, that when it comes to the application of law, it applies differently? Something is wrong. Sometimes the stresses and pains that women carry every day to take care of children, to take care of the house, and still come to work and expected to perform like men. I am of the view that the playing field is not level. So what role must we play as men to assist to ensure that the environment is proper? There must be provision for children, the working hours, the conditions. They must be reviewed because it does not apply equally. It does not have regard to those factors that I talked about. So it is important that we make that review. I'm therefore suggesting also that, and raising an issue that the structures and systems that deals with women empowerment and gender-based violence need alignment. Sometimes we find structures and systems in conflict in dealing with this common subject. The same applies with leadership. Who must lead on this campaign? Is it women or is it men and women? Is it a process of hunger and anger? Is it an intention to be led by hunger and anger? Or is it a matter of subjectivity and objectivity? And as I draw to the close, one of the important findings you find in the Labour Code is that the CCMA, as a dispute resolution institution, must adopt a certain approach when dealing with matters relating to harassment and sexual harassment, that we have to be more sensitive in dealing with such cases. Because the last thing we want is to have a scenario where violence is now meted out in the hearing room. So we have reviewed our role as a dispute resolution institution to make sure that we accommodate matters relating to the sensitivities on matters of harassment. That is just a brief submission on the thoughts that I have as I present to you today. I will then proceed to present to you the 4-week program that will be running. So we're very conscious that in dealing with this launch is not about Women's Day. It is a Women's Month. in introducing that, in week 1, which is the week of the 3rd to the 7th of August, particularly on the 6th of August, we're going to hold a virtual Women's Day seminar, which will also be hosted live on this platform. In week 2, which is the 10th to the 14th of August, during this week we will have a CCMA men actively taking a stance against GBV by vocalizing suggestions which I think will also be reflecting in some of the issues that I spoke about today. And then on the week 3, which is the week of the 17th to the 21st of August, we will give the platform back to our queens for them to dialogue on pertinent challenges affecting them in order for them to devise a pragmatic approach with pragmatic solutions. The details of the session will follow. In the final week of the 24th to the 28th of August, and in rounding up this month, we will then celebrate our queens by acknowledging the successful feats won by females across the globe. It's quite an interesting session because as I was driving today, I was reminiscing on the role of our leading political women and the impact it has had to them and also to their families. That is the full monthly program that will be running as the CCMA. So therefore you are invited to participate in that program. And as we close on the final item, which will be a video, which will sum up the CCMA's commemoration of this special month. And having said everything I said, I look forward in all those that can to participate in this Women's Month on the programs that the CCMA have outlined. And thank you very much for listening to this brief submission. We will then proceed to the playing of the video. Thank you.
At the march, we sang the song Batinti Bafasi, which says, Stridum, you've struck a rock. You've struck the woman, you've struck a rock, you'll die. I always thought that I'll go into education, into teaching, but I also noticed around me the poverty of our people in the community. There were all these laws that were impacting on the lives of women that prevented them from moving around freely. And so that day we entered the Holy Grail, and it was like us being cheeky. We have dared to enter that domain.
Sophia Williams de Bruyn was the youngest woman who led the Women's March on the Union Building, and we were really looking for a portrait that showed that absolute dignity and significance of that day.
There was a plan that if the police did come, the 20,000 women would bend down and pray, and they would have had to arrest everybody. They came in that disciplined manner, and then they marched gracefully up those steps of the Union Building. And I felt a lump in my throat when I looked at this large army of women, dignified women, courageous women. And in my younghood, I felt so humbled to be part of such bravery. I don't think words can express how I feel about that time and now. And I think women today, wherever they are working, I think the women of that era opened the way for them.
Face up slightly towards the light.
I think the portrait itself revealed the courage, the commitment and the dignity that these women showed in 1956.
Yes, we've come a long, long way, and we never thought, but we always hoped that things will turn out the way they turned out for the betterment of women and of the country and of the nation.